Hi, this is Andrew Collins here. I've got some brand new Denisovan discoveries that I want to talk to you about. They've been published in this volume called Problems of Archaeology, Ethnology, Anthropology of Siberia and Adjacent Territories. Came out at the end of 2021. Here is the English introduction summary here, but before we get into that, let's just point out what we're talking about. These discoveries are coming out of the Denisovan Cave, which is a location, habitation place that's in Russia, very close to the borders with Kazakhstan and Mongolia and China. And obviously, we didn't even know anything about the Denisovans until 2010, when a bone that was found in that cave was sequenced and found to be not human, as in ancient modern humans, and not Neanderthal, but a brand new type of people. And they have since become known as the Denisovans. Anyway, the Denisovan Cave it overlooks a river called the A.Yu. I believe that's how it's pronounced. I'm sure somebody will tell me if I've got it wrong, or the Anoi. And this is what it looks like. Prime place of habitation in Paleolithic times. I mean, somewhere like this would have been much sought after, not only by our own ancestors, modern humans, but also by the Denisovans and, of course, the Neanderthals. The Neanderthals were here as well. Most people associate the Neanderthals with Europe, but they were as far east as Siberia, as we can see from the fact that bones of them have been found in this cave as well. And work has been going on at the Denisovan Cave for decades. And some incredible stuff has been coming out, not only human remains, but items of sophistication that are unlike anything else in the world for the particular time frame that we're dealing with here, which is known as the Initial Upper Paleolithic. And that basically is around 45 to 50,000 years ago. That's what we're dealing with here. And there's debate over who might have been here at this time. We certainly know that Denisovans were around, but you know, the Russian archaeologists working on the site, particularly Mikhail Shunkov, who is the author of this new paper, him and his colleagues, believe that it was the Denisovans that made these artifacts, whereas their Western colleagues in places like Britain, where I'm talking to you from now, they consider that Denisovans, you know, were probably not that educated, so it must have been our own modern humans that created that. They must have got to Siberia, even though there's no actual evidence that modern humans were in the Denisovan Cave at this time. But before we get into this, let's have a look at some of these artifacts that have been found. This is a ring. When I say a ring, obviously a bracelet, almost certainly, or a bangle made of white marble. I mean, obviously quite marvelous. And you can see at the ends of it, it has these terminations, which suggested it, as I said, it could be like some kind of bangle. And this is it. And if that's the case, then, you know, it's a very, very interesting piece of jewelry to wear. There are pendants that would have been worn around the neck, made, as you can see here, if you can read Russian, made of either foxes' teeth or those of undulates, basically. And when I say teeth, I'm going to assume that they're teeth for the moment. We'll come back to that. And in the bottom right here, you can see a clamshell pendant. So they were obviously penetrating holes into shells. I'm not sure exactly what this one here is made of, but that was quite interesting, quite symmetrical. And here's another white marble stone ring that was manufactured by them. This one looks like it would have been a complete, you know, bangle, wrist bangle to wear. It doesn't seem as if it would have had any terminations. But so what is being found here? And before we go on to look at any of the other incredible things that have already come out of this cave over the last 15 years, let's have a read about some of what they're saying about this new stuff. So as a result of the study, the technologies for ornament production were reconstructed. The two methods of their use were determined, and examples of ornaments reshaping for using according to a new function were recorded. The technology for the teeth pendants production included a short sequence of operations: obtaining blanks, processing by planing or scraping, applying circular cuts, or perforating by drilling. The production of flat beads was carried out by cutting out elongated plates from the walls of the tubular bone of large mammals, preparing blanks by planing, cutting out preforms by conical drilling and grinding. Now, I don't know about you, but for 45,000 years ago, possibly as early as 50,000, this seems pretty sophisticated. This almost seems like a sort of manufacturing technology that they had going here. Not something that they were doing just randomly, just for the sake of passing the time. The finished pendants and beads were massively used to decorate clothes and as personal apparel. And I mean, I'm almost seeing this as almost the thing to wear, as it were. I mean, this is like the bling of the initial Upper Paleolithic. And in some strange way, it could even be that there was some kind of fashion involved with this. In other words, what might have been in that year as opposed to the next. The technology for the production of ornaments from marble, I mean, that's something that you would also generally only associate with, people like the Romans or, I don't know, the Greeks or something like this. But no, these people, let's assume it was Denisovan, because I think it probably was, were involved a short or longer sequence of actions to create the most complex marble products, the rings and bracelets. A similar technological sequence was used, including the selection and transportation of raw materials, perforation followed by boring of the resulting hull, grinding and polishing. Rings and bracelets were used as apparel and probably had a special status. Now, special status essentially means that they could have been worn by shamans. In other words, or leaders, of course, although probably back in those days that the two would have gone hand in hand. And this is interesting because that alone suggests almost a tiered society existing. And the other thing about getting raw materials is that we know that from other items that were found in the cave, like ostrich shell beads, that they were traveling thousands of miles or trading across thousands of miles to get these items. Ostrich shells you couldn't get in Siberia. You had to go all the way to places like Lake Baikal, which is about 1,000, 1,500 miles to the east of the Denisovan Cave. They used a particular type of green stone to create the famous Denisovan bracelet. That's made of something called chloritolite. That comes from Kazakhstan. The closest source of that is many hundreds of miles away. But you're dealing with boring, you're dealing with drilling. And as I said, this is like some kind of production line type of activity. I mean, all right, it may have been done by individuals, just spending an awful lot of time just making their own little artifacts. But it seems as if something else was going on. It's almost like a factory-like production. I mean, all right, it may not have been taking place inside the Denisova cave itself, but clearly something was going on amongst this culture that we need to understand. I'll continue. Personal decorations made of bone, tusk, business stone, whatever that is. Please excuse the Russian to English translations here. Ostrich eggshells, mentioned them, shells of mollusks are the most massive and striking manifestations of symbolic knowledge in the context of monuments of the early Upper Paleolithic of Eurasia. Now, let's point this out, that nothing like this is essentially seen again, certainly not on this scale, until the advent of the pre-pottery Neolithic. And this is about 11,500 years ago at places like Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe in Turkey, as well as Ashikli Hoyak, which is in central Turkey, very close to the underground cities of Derinkiyu, for instance, and Kaymakli. And at this last place, for instance, they made beautiful obsidian artifacts, bracelets and pendants and whatever. And yet this is in the Paleolithic. What's going on at the Denisovan Cave is the beginning of the Upper Paleolithic age. Sorry, the Neolithic age is when obviously the stuff was going on at Göbekli Tepe, Karahan, Ashikli Hoyak, but it's the beginning of the Upper Paleolithic, which is 35,000 years earlier, that all of these items that I'm showing you now were manufactured. The diversity and specificity, I can't get that word, of personal organization objects reflect the existence in the culture of the first Upper Paleolithic communities of established preferences in the choice of form, certain types of ornamental raw materials, as well as deep knowledge in the field of its processing. Again, as I said, a manufacturing, a choice of items to use, obviously shared ideas amongst a community, almost a tiered society of activities. It is assumed that the widespread use of jewelry was a consequence not only of significant progress in the development of ancient technologies, but also of the increasing need of Paleolithic man for intra-group and inter-group communication, marking of social status, tribal age, or gender affiliation. Sophisticated stuff. And going on to stuff that has already been uncovered at the cave, we have this beautiful Denisovan bracelet. This dates to around 45 to 50,000 years ago. Once again, we can't say specifically that it was made by Denisovans because we don't know. I mean, it could have been, but the problem is that there's a debate. You know, the Russian archaeologists, you know, Shunkov and his Derivienko, another big Russian archaeologist working at the site, they all believe that this is Denisovan. The people in the West, out in Britain, in America, they say, no, this is impossible. It must be anatomical modern humans that created this. And I mean, this bracelet is just extraordinary. I mean, it's made of chloritolite, which is, as I said, from Kazakhstan. It has this drilled hole in it, and drilling seems to be something that they were very capable of doing. And it has a feed rate. When you study this bracelet microscopically, that it's so fast that it's like a modern drill, basically, has created it. Now, how they did that, we don't know. We're not saying they had electric drills. Clearly, they didn't. But they certainly knew how to use drills. So there's that. And this is how it would have been worn. The actual hole would have probably supported something else, you know, some kind of disc or something. But this is beautiful stuff. And as I said, you don't see stuff like this until the beginning of the Neolithic age, about 11,500 years ago in Turkey, which obviously also prompts the question of what's the relationship between places like Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, and the Denisovan Cave, and obviously the other sites that have been identified as Denisovan, like, for instance, the Bashir Cave on the Tibetan plateau, where a jawbone of a Denisovan was found. You know, and other sites that seemingly have been uncovered in China, which they think are probably associated with Denisovans. Here's another artifact that is from the same layer, layer 11, so-called Denisovan layer in the Denisovan Cave. I mean, this is the oldest bone needle anywhere in the world. Again, 45,000 years ago, minimum. And this would have been used to make tailored clothing. So you not only would you have had beautiful jewelry to wear, but you'd have had beautiful clothing to go with it. And I mean, just out of interest, there was a report a few years ago that the people in the Denisova Cave during this period may have even been riding around on horses, due to the fact that horse DNA and horse bones were being found in the cave. Now, that's speculation, but if that's correct, you've got beautiful jewelry, beautiful clothes, riding around on horses. These people are incredibly advanced. And you don't see this mentioned very often, but I've cited this in 2 books already, maybe even 3, I think now. And that's the fact that fragments of a musical instrument were found in the Denisova Cave. Now, it could have been a whistle, it could have been a flute. They don't know, because unfortunately it was so crushed when they found, they couldn't piece it properly together. But this shows that the Denisovans had a knowledge of musical notes, and obviously had to play instruments, and possibly even created songs. Here is an example of one of those ostrich shell beads, so beautifully done. And these are really tiny, by the way. I mean, because, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of them would have been used to create necklaces. So the amount of sophistication involved with this is quite extraordinary. Here's a tiara that was worn, that was found, made of mammoth ivory. Possibly, I mean, apparently this was quite of quite incredible size. So it showed that the head of whoever wore it was very big. And as you'll see, we have reason to believe that the Denisovans were particularly big people. So that makes sense. Again, therefore, it, you know, looks like this was a Denisovan artifact. I mean, it is possible that this was worn by a shaman. You know, similar, you know, Alice bands, as we know them in the West, were used by shamans, and probably still are today in Siberia. So it's possible that from this things would have hung. So that's another artifact. Pencils were found in the cave. Now, we obviously think of graphite pencils and long thin things, but in the past they were ochre stones like this. This was found in the Denisova Cave, again, layer 11, 45,000 years ago or more. And this means that they were either drawing on walls, drawing on themselves, or maybe drawing on flat surfaces. So they were creating beautiful art. I mean, we don't know what, but they certainly were doing it, because the pencils, which show evidence of use, have been recovered. And these are other artifacts that have been found in the cave. I mean, obviously the bracelets there, and you can see the bone needle and the stone tools. Now, this is important because the type of tools that the Denisovans were creating and looked initially very similar to those that the Neanderthals produced in Europe and in many parts of Asia, and are also even found in Africa. And this is known as the Mousterian, and they were made using the levelers technique. I think that's how you pronounce it. I always get it wrong. But anyway, what happens in the Denisova Cave and other similar sites in central Mongolia is that there's a transition around 45,000 years ago into the type of tool, so-called blade tools, that then become the mainstay of toolkits all the way down to the time of Göbekli Tepe. And even beyond that, you know, right the way down to the end of the Neolithic, about 3,000–4,000 years ago. And it has actually been proposed by archaeologists that the earliest type of tools that our own ancestors used could have come from contact with Denisovans who they met in places like central Mongolia between anything like 30,000 to 45,000 years ago. We don't know when the Denisovans disappeared. In Siberia, it was probably around 45,000 years ago. It probably does coincide when our first ancestors entered the same region. This is another item that was found, made of mammoth ivory. And this seems to be the body of a cave lion. And you'll see that it has a series of notches on both sides of it. And this is what it would look like when overlaid with a lion. You can see how it's placed. Obviously, there's no head. Obviously, there's no legs. And we don't know whether this object's complete or not. But I discovered something of great interest about this artifact, which, by the way, I think it could have been used as a comfort toy. I mean, it's well polished. It's been held by somebody over a very long period of time, maybe a child, could be an adult. And there are very specific amounts of notches on it. And they're all in sets and groups of 4. And there are 18 sets of 4. And when these notches are added together, they come to 72. Now, the number 18 is very strongly associated with the cycles of the moon. The number 72 is associated with the cycles of the sun, and 72 years is one precessional degree. Well, 1 degree of a precessional age takes 72 years. And this can actually be calculated from the fact that half a degree is the width as we see it of the sun or the moon. So 2 widths would be 72 years in movement. Now, I'm not saying that they had knowledge of precession, these people, but you'll read in my books that I talk about the links between the Denisovan DNA, its genome, and the genes relating to autism and, savant qualities. But let's not go into that at the moment. But that's in the books, which I've already written about. So what that essentially means is that there's a good chance that the Denisovans had a knowledge of the cycles of the sun and the moon, and that this may have been used to create some of the earliest calendars. And indeed, one of the oldest calendars in the world is actually found in Siberia. Right now, last year, big story was the discovery of the largest skull of a hominin anywhere in the world. And this became known as the Dragon Man skull. It was found at a place called Harbin in China, in northern China, as far back as the 1930s. I mean, I believe in size, it's 9 inches in length, and I think it's 6 or 7 in width. One of the teeth matches very well the teeth that have been found in the Denisovan Cave, which are of extreme large size, and was the first indication that the Denisovans were very big, basically. And even though the Chinese paleoanthropologists that have worked on this skull want to see it as a unique species, they call it Homo longi, which basically means, dragon man. Which is a very interesting story in its own right, because there are legends of walking dragons in the very area that it was found amongst the Mancunian peoples of the region. But most Western paleoanthropologists are pretty certain that you're looking at a Denisovan skull, and that for some reason the Chinese will not accept that for the time being. More work needs to be done. DNA work needs to be done on the skull, and hopefully that will be forthcoming. You can see the archaic head, eyebrows that are here, the extremely long nature of this skull. And the Chinese created this reconstruction that you can see here of this, quite jovial guy here. This is your dragon man. But working with my colleagues, Nick Burton and George Hernandez, to try and get a much better idea of what this person may have looked like, have come up with this. I mean, again, you can see the extreme long nature of the skull. You can see, obviously, the heavy brow ridges here, a very wide nose, quite large mouth, no chin at all. And this is what they would essentially have looked like. This could be what you could be looking upon a Denisovan with this. Very, very peculiar looking people, obviously, but we need more bones. We need more, skulls. We need more evidence. The other thing worth mentioning is that the Denisovans were extremely large. All the indications is that they were the size of the biggest WWE wrestlers that you can come across, or if you're in America, American football, some of the biggest players. If that, think of those when you think of the Denisovans. I mean, this is the great Kali, Dalip Singh Rana, former WWE wrestler from Northern India, who is 7 feet 2 inches in height. If so, were the Denisovans the giants of legend? I think the answer is yes, but that's definitely another talk. So that's essentially it. My new book, which has a plethora of new material on the Denisovans, co-authored with my colleague Greg Little, comes out in June. It has been put back for certain reasons. That's published by Inner Traditions. Incredible stuff in there. I'll give you a prompt about that nearer the time. And these are the books that I've already done that talk a lot about the Denisovans, if you haven't already got them, starting with 2014's Path of Souls, which was Greg Little's book. I contributed to it, talking about the Denisovans and how almost certainly they were the giants of legend. The Cygnus Key, which came out in 2018, and Denisovan Origins, which I think came out in 2019. Again, that was written with Greg, and that really does go into depth and shows how the Denisovans fit into our world and how their descendants eventually founded places like Göbekli Tepe and obviously Karahan Tepe, as we know today. And from there, they went into Egypt, bringing their knowledge there, and that this eventually caused the explosion that we know as the Pyramid Age. So with that, I should say thank you very much. If you like what you see here, give this a like and also subscribe to my channel for more stuff on Denisovans, on weird stuff, on Karahan Tepe, Göbekli Tepe, and all the latest great discoveries taking place in the prehistoric world. So thank you very much.